Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to Jordan Harper. Jordan is an Ian Fleming Silver Dagger Award winner and an Edgar Award winner. Welcome, Jordan.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. Jordan's latest book is called A Violent Masterpiece, and it is exactly that. And I loved every minute of it. So, Jordan, will you give the audience an overview of what this is about?
Yeah, so it is set in Los Angeles right now. It is a very hyper-colored, neon, pulpy version of Los Angeles, but it's still the city that I live in. And it is about three different people. One is sort of a night crawler who goes out and films crime scenes and goes undercover amongst the rich and famous to dig up dirt. One is a defense attorney who usually defends the downtrodden, but has been hired to defend a Hollywood pedophile. And the third is a private concierge, but she's not the one who gets you like backstage passes to a concert. She's the one who introduces you to the exact kind of willing flesh and the exact kind of chemicals that you want to be introduced to. And they are all set on the path of investigating three different crimes or aspects of a crime that end up weaving together into one big epic kind of a cluster of crime and death and murder and violence, which is, yes, right there in the title. So
It is indeed. And I will say that you certainly do knit a story very well.
Thank you.
It was so woven so tightly and so seamlessly. And I have to ask, are you an organic writer or are you a plotter?
Well, I'm a plotter. I don't think you can write a book like this without plotting.
I didn't think so. At least I hoped you couldn't anyway, Jordan. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I worked for a long time in network television and then just television in general, streaming and stuff. And so I was taught to outline, and I think it served me very well, again, to do especially this and A Violent Masterpiece. It's not a sequel, but it takes place in the same world as my last book, which was called Everybody Knows. Same villains, different main characters. You don't have to have read Everybody Knows to enjoy A Violent Masterpiece. But both of them are these kind of big, epic crime stories where everything intersects. And I want that to not be confusing, and I want it to feel very natural. And so for me, the only way to do that is to outline.
Well, I will say that I have met plenty of organic writers, and I love the fact that their mind can keep all of these things, all these details in line. But I will say that I assumed from reading this that you were a plotter, because it is so meticulously done. It really is. Yeah. I actually wrote down a couple of things I want to read back to you. She got out of bed like she could leave her thoughts on the pillow. I love the singing of that. It is just, I knew how tired she was, how she felt, because she thought she could leave it all behind. And I love that.
Thank you.
So, do you consider yourself a lyrical writer?
Yes, I consider myself a prose stylist. I try to do both art and pulp at the same time, but I can't read prose that isn't interesting. And so I try very hard to make my own prose sing in the way that it sings, sometimes brutally, but I still like to sing.
But I think we live in a world that is flawed, to say the least. And so you dig out of the underbelly of Los Angeles in this book. Tell the audience what sort of captivates your attention about the underbelly of LA.
Well, I think first and foremost, I am a crime writer, and it's because I'm interested in violence explored through art. I'm not a violent person, but I think, understanding violence and both how violence is wrong, but how it's also appealing is something that I think we all really need to deal with where we're at right now. And I do enjoy, crime films and gangster movies and horror movies and things like that. And I think that appeals to me a lot. And also I think everybody likes secrets and like being on the inside and like knowing about what's going on behind closed doors. I think everybody's been to a party where a door closes and you don't know what's going on the other side. This time you weren't invited.
Yes.
And you always feel better when at least you know what's happening on the other side of that door. Maybe you even want to be on the other side of the door. Definitely want to know what's going on.
Well, that is true. I've been to a party where, the host and a guest go in a room and they close the door, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, number one, what's going on in there? Why aren't the rest of us privy to what's going on? And then, of course, I might be a little nosy. So, maybe I open the door. I don't know, but it is one of those things that, it is very exciting for me to read. I really do feel like I've had a very sheltered life, and I'm thankful for that. I don't do violence. I'm not a violent person. However, it fascinates me to read about it sometimes, because I have worked for some people that I consider to have been evil.
Mm-hmm.
If that's a category of a person, they certainly had some bad things going on in their life, and they didn't mind torturing others with it. So when someone gets a little comeuppance, I'm right there in the cheering section. So
well, a lot of what inspired me to write these last two books in particular is, as I mentioned, I've worked in Hollywood for a long time, and you cannot work in Hollywood for a long time without brushing up against some forms of evil, even if it's just like the little petty evil of people who yell at their assistants and throw things and
right.
And wanting to deal with that and wanting to like explore that in fiction. And then, sometimes watch those people get their comeuppance is part of the fun of books like this. And again, also just the thrill of like, what's the worst thing you can think of? And what if it was happening over there and you could at least peer through a window? There's a lot of things that are seen through windows in this book.
There are. And so I asked Jordan before we started recording if I could ask about some of the details of the book. So there's an orgy at a warehouse with a whole bunch of famous people, and I think anybody who's seen the news in the last several years knows that they exist in this world. Lots of people would like to keep it under wraps and under hush, but we all know from just watching the 6 o'clock news that some shady stuff goes down in different parts of the world. And LA is no different. I think LA, I love living here. I've been here 26 years and I love Los Angeles, but I will say that it's probably one of the seediest places I've ever been to or lived in. And I say that because not necessarily that it's dirty. It's just that anything goes here. There's every type of person you could meet walks the streets of Los Angeles.
Well, and every kind of appetite that a human being can have, somebody in Los Angeles has it. And chances are somebody in Los Angeles can figure out a way to get it. And I think that is the thing that we're seeing right now. And you're right, on the 6 o'clock news. And we were talking earlier that when I finished writing the first draft of this book, it was before Trump came back into office. And there's a lot of Epstein-esque stories in this book. And I was under the impression that maybe everybody would have forgotten about Jeffrey Epstein by now. And it turns out not at all to be the case. And, particularly the orgy that occurs about halfway through this book, what really fascinates me, as I mentioned earlier, Kara is one of the main characters, and she's a private concierge. And she is the woman who has to plan the billionaire orgy. And to me, that's the most interesting aspect of something like that, is the woman who has to be responsible for recruiting the sex workers, making sure they get tested and that she has all their tests on file, making sure that the right drugs are there, the right toys are there, that the lighting is right, that there's a DJ who's going to be able to play the right kind of music, that there's a place where everybody has to put their phones, because you cannot allow phones into a place like that. And that, to me, those people who are in the middle are really the ones who interest me the most. And that's who I tend to write about in these worlds, are the people who aren't evil and might actually be good if anybody ever asked them.
Right.
But nobody ever does.
No,
and that's sort of where we're at in the world right now.
Yeah. And I think it's because they're so busy wanting their needs met at any price. And I think obviously money changes a person's world. Having too much, too little, gives you a different socioeconomic. You have a woman in here, Diablita, who is certainly on the poor end of the spectrum. And it is, and you show that without judgment. You just show her as a fully formed character who intersects with Gibson. And it is just how life works. And there's a lot of commentary about who can leave and who can't leave. And I found that to be extraordinarily fascinating, Jordan.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, Diabolita was definitely the character I was the most nervous about writing the book, because I didn't want to make her a cliche in either direction, because she is
Right.
a gang member who has committed violence. And she's a person of color, and I was very nervous about making a cliche in that direction, but I also didn't want to overcorrect and make her some kind of misunderstood saint that, who was beyond our judgment. And so I worked very hard on making her feel like a real person. And one of the things I really wanted to do was show that people talk about gang members in LA and they have this picture in their head from the movies. And she's a homeless person who lives in MacArthur Park, because the truth is there are a lot of people who are quote unquote gang members, which is sort of a meaningless phrase. It's not this rigid hierarchy that people imagine it to be. And the fact that a woman could be homeless and desperate and a gang member was something I wanted to show. And I really did want to have her exist in the exact same world where you see rich people doing whatever they want.
Yes, yes. So I was just sort of struck by the fact that in the orgy scene, especially in the orgy scene, when she's going through the toys and the drugs and stuff, I will say that we have this place called the Pleasure Chest here in Los Angeles, in
Sure.
West Hollywood. I'm like, I think Jordan has spent an afternoon in the Pleasure Chest looking at all these toys, because the descriptions were really, really candid.
Well, I will say, first, my very first apartment in Los Angeles was in West Hollywood. So I do know exactly where the Pleasure Chest is, and I've been inside it. But for that scene, I did a lot of Googling into the deep sections of websites, of like the Adam and Eve or Pleasure Chest type websites. And I learned some things. There's always a corner of the world you haven't peeked at yet. And I did go pretty deep.
Well, but I love that, because, I've been in the Pleasure Chest as well. And so for the audience, it's a toy store for adults. And, but it's, there's a fetish for every person.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody likes things. Like, I'll share a little bit. I don't like to be bitten ever.
Yep.
I just don't like it. Some people like to bite. If that's your bag, that's your bag. I don't like to be bit. If you bite me, we're going to have a problem. But there are things that make, that titillate me, as it does every human. We all have something we like or dislike. And so I liked the fact that you went that detailed on it, because if you're going to orgy with billionaires, they know every trick there is to know, as whether it's pleasure or torture or pain or what have you. And these parties are no holds barred. I know that, or at least I've read about it and saw it on television. I should say that, because I'm certainly not a billionaire.
Well, I did, my editor tried to get me to cut the paragraph, because there is a paragraph that lists probably 35 sex toys that she has prepared for this orgy, and my editor felt it was excessive, and I moved where it was in the book. I didn't cut it. I just put it in a different place, and he didn't say anything about it the second time. But I do the same thing with, like, they list the drugs they can get. I do it when I list the different sex workers who are at this party, to make clear there's a type for everyone. And so you want to, again, Kara's job is to make sure that every single person who walks through that door finds something they like. And I really wanted to show, like, the backstage where it's not sexy at all, and where the male performers have to inject themselves with, like, which, again, you start reading about that stuff and
Yeah, right.
thank you.
Yeah, everything shrivels up on Dan. I'm like, holy cow. But I also know that exists, because I've known some people in the entertainment industry, or the adult entertainment industry, and I know the lengths some of them have to go through to be able to perform. And it's not easy. It's not easy on their bodies either.
No, it's, and that, again, is what interests me. And for people who haven't read the book yet, the first version of the orgy you see is the version from Kara's point of view, where it's very unromantic, and she's just literally, like, going through a checklist, making sure everything's in place. And then Jake comes to the orgy when it begins, and he falls under its spell. He sees it from the perspective of somebody coming in, and the music and the lighting and all those things work on him until there's a moment where it all goes wrong, and he's kind of brought back to himself. But I wanted to show behind the scenes first, so that you could kind of help understand how much work goes in, which it's almost a metaphor for writing a book, to be honest.
I agree.
You know,
And I mean, it's like planning a wedding, but on
Yes.
steroids or on crack. You know, it's really to the nth degree.
Well, exactly that. It's, the whole trick to a lot of things in life is doing a lot of work behind the scenes so that it looks easy on the
Yes.
surface.
Yes, because nobody wants a rich client to be sitting around waiting for them to finish their job. The job needs to be done before the client gets there.
Exactly. And I did do a lot of research. I talked to a couple of different private concierges. I actually am friends with a woman who's a medical private concierge, which is a fascinating aspect of all of it. And she was the one who taught me the phrase high worth and very high worth, which is how you organize the wealthy. And I can't remember where the cutoff line is. It might be $10 million. Like below $10 million, you're just high worth. Or maybe it's even bigger than that, because very high worth is when you're getting into like the billionaires. But there are categories for everything, and there it's like getting on the airplane, and there's
Right. First class,
premium plus,
that's right,
premium
that's right.
gold,
Yes, and Dan's next to the bathroom in the back, because because I'm cheap like that. So, but occasionally I upgrade. So I just love that, and I love the fact that you did your homework on drugs as well, because there are so many out there. And I tell you, ketamine is very big here in Los Angeles, and that shocks the tar out of me, because I'm like, don't you see all these overdoses from that? But I mean, I guess if you really want to be numb, you don't care.
I suppose so. I did do a lot of research. In all honesty, I've been sober for a while, and I never did ketamine when I did drugs, and it bothered me that I hadn't when I was writing this book, because I like to be authentic, and I can write about other drugs from a knowing perspective. So I tried very hard to read a lot about the user's experience of ketamine, because I don't want somebody to go, I don't want somebody to read the book and go, oh, he definitely has never tried it. Just
right.
Because I don't want to break that dream. I want them to just keep reading,
Right. I will tell you, I thought the detail was fabulous, Jordan. I really
Thank you.
did. So I got high, and I didn't even have to get up off the couch. I loved it. And so it's, I think, and also because there's inside the orgy, there's a scent of opium,
yes,
blowing throughout the air. And I thought, wow, I've never heard of that. And I've read a lot, and I've seen a few things in life, but I'd never heard of that. And I'm like, wow, I can only imagine what kind of fuel that adds to the fire.
Well, my intention was more, not that it was literally opium was being pumped through, but more just the scent of it, the way that, like, this shirt I'm wearing, I bought at one of those like stores where they sell you very expensive jeans, and
right,
it still has the smell of the store, which is that just like hardwood kind of, thing. And I love like how boutique hotels smell. And it just, that when you're at that kind of high level, they think of everything, including the smell. And you just want again, they're trying to create such a complete experience that none of your senses are left out of it. And I find that fascinating. And again, I wanted that feeling to come through.
So I love the ending, which, let's spoil it for everybody, Jordan, just kidding. So I will say that you, as I said earlier, you weave so effortlessly, and the stories have a very solid ending. And I liked that. I could see how it would be easy to sort of leave it open to, interpretation or what have you. But I really felt like you had done a great job at wrapping the story up for the audience of readers.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Like I said, this is the second book in what might be, there might be a third book as well.
Okay.
Not right away. I'm writing a book that's completely different right now, but
you're writing a romantic comedy, aren't you, Jordan? Tell me.
I'm actually, it is a romance. It's not a comedy.
Oh no,
I'm writing a love story, but it's a crime love story. There's certainly lots of violence. I don't know how to write books without violence in them. But The one thing that I will not allow myself to do, it's not that I feel like you have to be totally realistic, but I think right now, and this is not really a spoiler, but what doesn't happen in the book is all the bad guys are not lined up in a row in handcuffs and sent to jail, and the mayor doesn't come and shake all our heroes' hands and say, "Great, from here on out, LA is clean as a whistle."
Right. Yeah.
Because
that doesn't happen in real life.
Right.
Sadly. I mean, we're certainly seeing that in today's world.
Yes. And the trick is, and I try to, I did a similar thing with Everybody Knows, where you want a sense of resolution and some sense of hope without the falseness of, if we just tell everybody the bad things are happening, then the forces of good will sweep in and we don't have to worry anymore. Because nobody's going to buy that at this point in time.
I don't think so either. I wouldn't have either. And I would have probably had a very different conversation with you had you done that to me. So I missed your slot at Romans because I was out of town. Are you touring with this book?
I'm not, I was there with my friend S.A. Cosby, who's also a crime writer. And we always do an event with each other when we have a new novel at Romans. He flies in from Virginia. It's just a tradition we've had. This is the fourth time we've done it. But we talk about this because he's a very successful writer. And the truth is, book tours are in a lot of ways a thing of the past, unless you're a very established writer who sells a lot of copies. And, particularly now, in the last couple of months with airfare going insane, the amount of copies of a book you have to sell to justify a plane trip and a hotel room is pretty large. Yeah. And so, no, I'm not, I would love to do more podcasts and things. I think, honestly, that's replacing touring is people will literally say I'm doing a podcast tour. And right now I'm doing a podcast tour of Out with Dan. But I'd like to do more of that, but I don't know if I'll actually be traveling a lot because, again, I don't know if you've looked at plane prices last month.
Yeah, I'm going to DC in the beginning of June, and I am dreading having to book that ticket because I can only imagine what it's going to be like.
Well, I don't want to scare you off, and I don't want to go too far off topic, but I was going to go to New York next month, and I decided to go to Santa Barbara instead because
that's drivable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Precisely. Exactly. So, well, Jordan, I hope you the very, very best of luck with A Violent Masterpiece. It is so excellent. Here's that wonderful cover again. I love the orange color, and it's very representative of Los Angeles. Thank you so much for joining me, Jordan.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com. on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at Go Out with Dan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.